His door had been drenched in bright red paint, an embarrassment he could never forget. It all started when his landlord, a man who had always despised him, decided to punish him for a late payment. But Michael, unaware of the landlord's intentions, was the actual owner of the building, and his world turned upside down in an instant. He made a decision that would shake the entire city and change his life forever. What he did next would astound even the most experienced. But let's start from the very beginning. James Ferguson walked through the snow, his movements slow and weary. At 78 years old, each step became harder, but his spirit was still strong. He hadn't visited the shelter he had founded for several years. Time had passed, his health had declined, and he often had to stay at home. But today, he didn't want to sit alone. He wanted to make sure that his creation was still running, that those in need were still receiving help. With every step toward the familiar building, he felt the weight of age and pain bearing down on him. But his memories of the times when the shelter was built from scratch gave him strength. Once, this place had been his life, his work, his fight for justice and equality. But now, everything seemed a little different. The shelter was no longer what he had created. He had seen how new rules and systems had changed it over time, even with the best of intentions. He knew things couldn't remain the same, but he felt that his old habits and methods might no longer fit the reality. James reached the shelter's door and saw a young woman standing on the threshold. She looked to be in her 20s, wearing a dark hoodie and jeans, holding a tablet. Her face was focused as she quickly typed something on the screen, not noticing him. James stepped forward and stopped. "Good afternoon," he said, trying to smile, though his voice was hoarse and weak. "I'm James Ferguson, the founder of this shelter. I came to check on how things are going." The young woman looked up, her gaze passing over his face without recognition. She didn't recognize him. Her eyes lingered on him for just a second before returning to the tablet. "Sorry, but you'll need identification to get inside," she said, not acknowledging what James had said. "We have strict rules, and I can't make exceptions." James froze, feeling his heart tighten. He was the founder of this place, and now they were treating him like an outsider. The young woman kept checking the electronic list, not sparing him even a minute of attention. "I'm telling you, I'm the founder," James repeated, feeling his voice lose confidence. "I built this shelter. I founded it. I've cared for it all these years." The young woman lifted her eyes and seemed to hesitate for a moment, but then replied calmly, "Sorry, but I can't let you in without ID. We have to follow the rules, and without documents, I can't let anyone inside." His words seemed to have no weight. It was like a slap in the face. He didn't know what to feel. Disappointment, bitterness, or anger. He stood there, a ghost from the past, unable to believe he was in this situation. He had been the one who saved lives, the one who had pulled hundreds of people from the dark corners of the city, and now he was being denied entry to his own creation. "I don't understand," he said, holding back, but his voice quivered. "This is my home, my work. I built it." But the young woman remained firm, her face blank, as if she saw not a person, but just another visitor who didn't fit the criteria. "Sorry, but I can't let you in," she repeated. "Please leave." James felt his pride and pain intertwining, as everything inside him clenched with humiliation. He, the founder of this place, stood before a woman who didn't even care who he truly was. It was unbearable, and his words tangled in his throat. He simply turned around in silence and left, feeling his legs barely carrying him away from what had once been his life. The next morning, James returned. He couldn't let go of the incident. The young woman was right that rules had to be followed, but couldn't she have at least tried to understand who he was? He was old, but not foolish, and he knew that if it had been someone else, not him, her reaction would probably have been different. He decided to return and try to explain. But before he could reach the door, he saw the young woman coming out of the building. She didn't notice him, and James quickly walked up to her, grabbing her by the shoulder. "Wait," he said. "We need to talk." The young woman turned around, and for a moment she looked uneasy. She clearly hadn't expected to see him again. I didn't mean to offend you," she said, trying to justify herself. "It's just, We have strict rules, and I had to... I understand. James interrupted her, but his voice was heavy. But I was here before these rules. I built this place from scratch, saved people, saved their lives, and now I'm being denied entry to the place I built. The young woman fell silent, realizing the absurdity of the situation. She was a volunteer, and she had to follow the instructions. But this man before her wasn't just some random person off the street, not just another old man. He was the one who had created this shelter. "I'm sorry," she finally said. "I didn't know it was you. I just had to follow the procedure." James breathed in the cold air, feeling his emotions start to overwhelm him. "I can't just be your document," he said. "I'm a person. I'm the founder of this place, and I deserve to be respected, no matter what's written on my ID." The next day, James came again, but with a different mindset. He understood that he couldn't just ignore what was happening. The young woman was no longer just the girl at the post. She was part of the system that had stopped working the way it was supposed to. For her, it wasn't about what the rules stood for, but just the rules themselves. Entering the shelter, James saw how everything had changed. This wasn't the place he had known. Everything was sterile, organized by lists, all according to the clock. Less personal approach, more formality. He was no longer here as the founder, but as just another old man being checked. The volunteers all followed their instructions, not questioning anything. Everything was predictable, just like the system that consumed everything that had once been alive. James passed the room where people used to sit and receive help. It was empty. He felt his soul grow heavy. The system had done its job. It had helped, but in reality, it was killing everything they had fought for. He headed toward the office where the administration worked. He was greeted by a middle-aged woman. She immediately recognized him. "Is there something you need, sir?" "I'm the founder," James said, his voice firm now. "And I need to talk about what's happened to this place." A few days later, James came to the shelter again, but this time everything was different. The young woman approached him, seemingly to apologize, but James was no longer the same person who had first arrived. He now understood that behind this building was far more than just procedures and rules. He had returned to the cause because now he knew. As long as he was alive, his voice would be heard. "I understand," he said to the young woman. "For you, it's all about the rules. But you mustn't forget that behind those rules are people. Systems may change, but we must remember what stands behind them. Otherwise, we'll lose what we're trying to do." The young woman looked at him, and her eyes filled with understanding. "I understand you," she said quietly.